And our second in a series of presentations on big ideas and newsroom innovations comes from David Schechter. Schechter serves as National Environmental Correspondent at CBS News and Stations. As part of CBS's Innovation Lab, he's helping local stations across the U.S. gain confidence in the climate beat. Will you please join me in welcoming him?
Thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about local TV news. So taken as a whole, the extreme weather stories that we've covered this summer paint a very troubling picture. We had record heat, deadly wildfire, a major hurricane, blankets of smoke across much of the United States. As climate journalists, we in this room, we all understand what the science is telling us about the future, that we need to be prepared to cover even more extreme events, but not just cover them. We need to connect those stories to climate change when the connection exists. Many national news organizations are already doing this exceptionally well, but there's one sector of the news business that is struggling, and that is local television. I know this because I've worked in local TV for 30 years, and I have seen many of my colleagues be intimidated to talk about climate change on the air, even today. At the root of this problem, I believe, is fear, or more specifically, a fear of getting it wrong, getting harassed, and losing the audience. I work at CBS News and Stations, and we are helping our local journalists and meteorologists confront these fears in an effort to develop what we call climate confidence. The feeling that you have enough knowledge and enough support to do the job. And it's a method we think the rest of the industry can also follow suit. Our approach starts with a flagship series that we call On the Dot that I host. It's long-form climate reporting with a big dose of adventure, and it runs in local newscasts on CBS-owned television stations. These are ambitious projects. For example, just yesterday, we left a place called Svalbard, Norway. It is the fastest warming community in the world. Svalbard is like a canary in the coal mine, giving us an early warning about what will happen in our own country, and in many places is already happening. On this project, we are encouraging our local stations to collaborate with us and show how extreme melting impacts places like New York or Los Angeles, Boston, Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, Denver. Through this work, we hope to inspire our colleagues to begin their climate reporting journeys. Next, in partnership with Covering Climate Now, we founded what we call the CBS E-Team. It's a training program for local reporters, meteorologists, and news managers. And for the rest of my time today, I'd like to tell you about how we're helping our E-Team colleagues get started on the climate beat. Let's begin by acknowledging that these fears that we're talking about are very real for people, particularly the fear of harassment. You can ask Chris Gloninger, a TV meteorologist in Iowa. After dealing with online threats for talking about climate change on the air, he made news this summer when he quit his job, partly because of those harassments. I've had my share of hostile comments as well, particularly when I post online using the hashtag climate change. Somehow they just find you. On one post this summer, a person bragged about punching climate activists at parties, and I think that's a hard pass for me on that invitation. I won't be going to that one. But here's the deal, and this is what we teach. Most of this noise, as you may know, comes from a small sliver of people. It is a group that the Yale Center for Climate Communication calls dismissives. They are people that reject science, the science of climate change, and they embrace conspiracy theories. The good news is that Yale tells us that dismissives make up about 10% of the population. They're loud, they are aggressive, but their numbers are small. Unless it seems like someone is open to a real conversation, what we train our local colleagues is to simply ignore the noise and move on. Now on to our bosses in the newsrooms. They want balanced stories and a variety of perspectives. Their fear is getting the story wrong, and that's totally understandable. But climate change is different than many other kinds of stories. What managers need is basic training in climate science so that they can avoid leaving the audience thinking that there are two sides to this story, that there is meaningful scientific debate when that is simply just not true, as we all know. Through the E-Team, our news managers are getting that kind of climate training now. And they're learning things like 99% of climate research agrees that our emissions are heating up the planet. I love telling them how NASA scientist Kate Marvel puts it, which is, we are more sure that greenhouse gas emissions cause climate change than we are that smoking causes cancer. Indeed, when was the last time you saw a television station do a point-counterpoint on the pros and cons of smoking? It just doesn't happen. News managers are not climate experts, and they don't need to be. But we believe that proper training will lead to more accurate stories and ultimately a better informed public. The last fear is about losing the ratings war. That's what general managers at television stations worry about. As the big boss at a local station, it is their job to make sure that as many people are watching their station as possible. Given the kind of negative feedback that comes with reporting about climate, it would be easy for a GM to conclude that these kinds of reports are alienating their audience. Instead, we think GMs should understand that covering climate may actually be a ratings winner, an opportunity. That's because despite all the noise from this small group of dismissives, the research shows that the public is very interested in this topic. We believe local stations that stand up and lead on climate change may be able to differentiate themselves from the competition and broaden their appeal with younger audiences who are hungry for this kind of news. And just as important, when someone on their staff does develop enough climate confidence to go out and start doing this job, the general manager needs to be clearly communicating this to these people. When the criticism starts flying, I have your back. So how's the training going? Well, we've been doing this now for almost a year. It's been very hard work, but we've had some really great successes. One of the big ones comes from Scott Paget, our colleague, chief meteorologist at our station in Dallas-Fort Worth. Prior to joining the E-Team, Scott had not talked about climate change at all on the air, which is not uncommon. But through the training, Scott gained climate confidence and he decided this was something he wanted to do. He told me he was a little bit anxious as he prepared his newscast or his weathercast for the night about a segment. It was a segment about how extreme summer heat in Texas is influenced by climate change. He was nervous, but he went ahead and he did it anyway. As you can imagine, the reaction was pretty predictable. The comments came in quickly, and many of them were very negative. But Scott didn't back down. He knew what to expect, and that it was okay for him to just ignore it. Months later, he's still now making that connection, which we're really happy to see. And his station has even launched a regular climate reporting franchise. A big bonus. I mean, get this, Scott's GM totally had his back. She encouraged him to keep going with a note, and it said, all we can do is present them with fact-based, accurate reporting, and then let them make their own informed decisions. You have allies on this journey, and leaning on each other is critical. That was a huge win from top to bottom. Climate change is a tangible threat to the health and safety of local communities as we see the world through local communities. There is an unending list of important local stories that we can work on. And who better to do that than, as Mark said, local news, still the most trusted and largest source of news in the country. But a big part of keeping that trust means shining a light in dark places, something we can't do if we're afraid to even turn on our flashlights. Thank you.